Hey y'all, Producer Drew here. Before we jump into today's episode, I wanted to let you know that you'll be hearing some clips from a documentary we recently produced about today's artist, Tina Williams Brewer. So if you like what you hear and you want to see more, you can watch the whole thing free right now on YouTube and our website, columbiamuseum.org. And if you want to learn even more about our experiences with Tina, you can join the curator, Michael Neumeister, and myself on Friday, August 31st at 1 p.m. here at the Columbia Museum of Art. We'll be doing a special screening of the documentary, followed by a Q&A about the film and the exhibition. Hope to see you there. But for now, let's start the show.
You're listening to Binder. I'm Ray McManus. Well, I am here with Michael Neumeister. Not your first time on the show. This is your second time on the show.
My second time. Drew's got me busy around here.
And quite frankly, you should be busy around here, because from what I understand, it's best to keep you busy. But gosh, I don't even remember what the first time you were on for. But it doesn't matter because they can always go back and listen to our podcast on the CMA website or anywhere they podcast. But you are a curator here at the Columbia Museum of Art, and we're going to be talking about a brand new exhibit here that you've curated, Tina Williams Brewer, Stories of Grace.
Yeah. So Tina is a story quilter. She's based in Pittsburgh, so she's been making quilts for the better part of 4 decades, but prior to that, she studied advertising and design at the Columbus College of Art and Design in Ohio. She got a great formal art education there. But when she graduated, she was making mostly ceramics, and she always was taking pictures. She always considered herself a photographer. So she has children in the early 80s, and she turns to quilting because she needs something that she can do, as she says, for like a little money and something that she can do at home and sort of return back and forth to it. Whereas if she's making ceramics, she's like throwing things on a wheel and stuff like that. And it's just kind of problematic. She needs a studio for that. So she's making quilts at home, and she learns almost informally in these like local crafts groups in Pittsburgh. But she quickly seizes on this, and she totally kind of explodes the idea of what quilt making can be.
It wasn't like the traditional quilts that have rules and regulations that are there that distinguish whether or not the quilt is good and whether or not the binding's right and all of those things. So I really didn't want to be confined to those rules.
She really is interested in figural work. She introduces figures early on into her work in the 1980s, and then that sort of expands and it explodes into what it is today, which is these large-scale, multicolored, figurative and abstract compositions that incorporate fabrics from all over the world, fabrics from her travels, as well as these motifs that she's drawn from African traditions, as well as motifs that she's developed on her own and that she uses continually throughout her work. And all of these things have different signs and recognition and symbolic meaning.
Yeah, I think that's, when I first heard about the exhibit, my only experience of quilts are from a utilitarian sort of standpoint, right? Because here it would have been more of flour sacks and sugar sacks and you sewing those together and you stuffed them and then you had a blanket, and it kept you warm. That is not what you see on the wall here. And I love the fact that you talked about the different colors and the different fabrics. And they're also multidimensional in depth. There are things behind fabric. Can you talk some more about, are the stories that are coming from it? Are they about place? Is it autobiographical? What's going on? Because there's a lot going on in these things.
Yeah. Well, it's all of the above. She is really reverent of strip quilt. So the tradition that you're referencing is basically strip quilting, which is a huge thing in the South, of course, and something that she's totally mindfully engaging because she's originally from West Virginia, and her great-great-grandmother was a strip quilter in Kentucky. So Tina has 100-plus-year-old scraps of fabric and pieces of quilt that her great-great-grandmother had made, which actually
that's cool,
wind up in some of her works, and is actually there's a piece of it in the show in an installation that she made. But yeah, the central theme in her work is African diasporic history and what I would call cultural memory and ancestral memory, and just looking at the ways that ideas are communicated down through objects and also through an almost ephemeral lens.
You know, the ancestral memory, I think, is always there for all of us to access. Any place that you are, we all have ancestors, and that energy of those ancestors is there.
The way that spiritual ideas and religious ideas and historical ideas, like what is the intersection of all those things? And it's really difficult to articulate in words. And I think any artists, when they're really firing on all cylinders, they choose the perfect medium to articulate the ideas that they're trying to express. And for Tina, quilting is it. I mean, this idea of layering, because with a quilt, you can layer things. I mean, she uses transparent fabrics, and part of that layering has to do with metaphorically approaching ideas about African American history that have been obscured over time, but also retrieving them in a way that is resilient and celebratory of the legacies and the histories that the diasporic experience have held. So yeah, it's kind of all of the above. And then another thing that's really interesting that she does, and something that I think is immediately approachable for people, is when she uses photographs, so she does photo transfer, silk screens into her work, those are oftentimes photos of family members or of places that she's visited. So there's this aspect of it that triggers ideas of biography, and, you know, sometimes you can see a portrait of someone in Tina's family and think, oh my God, I have family portraits that look just like that, or that person looks like someone in my family, you know, and it triggers sort of all of these memories and this flood of ideas that I think is really kind of amazing and rich.
There's something, and I was drawn to this in my notes because I thought that this was sort of an interesting aspect, because I think as a poet, using an object or objects to tell stories. So for a poet, we'd use images, right, to tell those stories. And she was talking about, is it Lucasa?
Yeah, and that relates to her also being a teaching artist. So she started making quilts with the idea that they would be handled and touched by students, mostly children and younger folks. But, you know, one of the first places she ever taught was actually at a senior center. So it was really for everybody. And she talks about Pittsburgh being this place. It's like the meeting point of so many cultures, like Eastern European immigrants. You know, you have Polish immigrants. You also have the great Italian population, the Jewish population, and of course, it's African American population. So when she lands in Pittsburgh in the early 70s, and she's living there and she's sort of acclimating to it, originally being from Huntington, West Virginia, which is a very different place, everybody has carved out their own cultural niche. And she's like, well, I need to learn about my own ancestry and culture in a more meaningful way so that I can be conversant with these people here.
For me, I needed to go find something, because how can you sit at the table with a large group of people and talk about, you know, history and lineage and all of that, and you've got nothing to say? There has to be something to say.
So when she starts mining that history and the history of African American experience and her personal history and making those connections, she starts making these quilts as a way of processing. And in order to share that culture, she lands on this idea of becoming a teaching artist. So the quilts are made, as I said, with the view toward people literally being able to touch them and to teach students how to quilt and to teach them, you know, that it's this really incredible and unique method of creative expression. And because of the medium itself, it can draw into all of these different things about people's ancestry and a sense of place and notions of history. But a huge part of that for her is pulling fabrics from different parts of the world. So she traveled to Ghana in 1998 and she sourced fabrics from there. She has friends who travel around, and she has beautiful fabrics from India that appear in some of her works. And I guess the point is that she's looking at world cultures, but especially African cultures. And one of those great African traditions in West Africa is the use of memory boards, or lukasa, which are teaching tools that are meant to be touched. And they're often carved out of wood with shells and found objects in them. And when they're touched in a certain way by the people who know how to use them, they're supposed to conjure histories of the culture that inspire the decisions that are being made as one progresses through life. And that could be for political decisions and social decisions and so on. So this idea of touch, teaching, remembering, and communicating history in a form that isn't written down, communicating an oral history, and recording history in a way that is not literary, in a way that is not the written word. That's why she looks at quilts almost as analogous to La Casa.
Okay. Yeah. No, I love it. I mean, I can see some similarities culturally in the South. You know, so much of our cultural memory was sort of worked around that, the idea of, you know, objects that if you didn't have somebody who knew how they worked or knew how to use that as a way to teach, then the object was just an object. I mean, it was just sitting there, right? And knowing that she, you know, which I think is evident in the pieces, the attention to place. Let's talk about how that the connection to South Carolina. Where does that come from? There are places throughout the exhibit where that really pops and you can see it, but I think even better, you can feel it.
Yeah, and I'm glad that sense of being able to sort of perceive things in an emotional way is coming through, because when I called Tina for the first time, I didn't know, actually. I thought I was, calling a Pittsburgh artist with roots in West Virginia. But it turns out that so much of her work is inspired by South Carolina. And in the early 2000s, her daughter moved here to St. Helena Island in the Low Country. And Tina would come down and visit and do research there. And she was really drawn to the Gullah culture. She was really interested in learning as much as she could. I'm new to South Carolina, right? I've only been here for a year and a half. So
yeah, we still got to work on your accent.
Yeah. Well, I have a ways to go with that. But visiting, Beaufort for the first time, and especially St. Helena Island, and especially with Tina, you really get this sense that this is a place where the landscape is communicating something distinct and unique. Yeah. That this je ne sais quoi that you cannot articulate in words. And like walking through that space, I got it. I understood at that moment what Tina was talking about, or what Tina was quilting about. So, I mean, in a literal sense, she would take pictures of St. Helena Island when she was in Penn Center and the Coffin Point Community Praise House, just locations on the island, and she would photo transfer them and quilt them into her works.
This is a very special place here, and everybody's going to have their opinion about what it is that South Carolina means. I choose to believe that this is our ancestral home.
There's one thing about the exhibit that I thought was interesting, because there's one thing in the exhibit that stands out from the rest. You have these beautiful quilts all along. And I think, Michael, you did a fantastic job. It had to be really difficult figuring out how to put them together with all of the colors and all of the things. I'd like for you to talk a little bit about that. What went behind the arrangement of those? And then maybe after, talk about the altarpiece that's in there, and what is up with that?
Yeah. So I didn't want to be super explicit about the themes, quote unquote, of each gallery. I think as a true artist survey of Tina's career, of course, we're so appreciative of all the lenders. I mean, a lot of the stuff came from Tina's studio, but, several important works came from museums around the country who lent them out for the show and appreciated the importance of it. So just having a clear picture of Tina's output for these past 4 decades and being like, okay, well, what do I pick? And all of these conversations with Tina, and turning every page that had ever been written about her and turning and listening to every, video that she was ever on and talking to her and spending so much time with her. I felt that, that's the way to be true. That's the way to be true to an artist's work, which is always the number one goal of any curator. And it's to let the artist's work breathe and let it be legible. So I didn't name, quote unquote, galleries. I didn't name the sections, but I oriented each gallery with a quote from Tina. And then I sort of implicitly arranged the galleries according to like themes that are kind of internal to me, and hopefully people can pick up on them. So it starts with the earliest work in her career and it ends with the most recent work in her career. But as you move through, it's sort of thematic. So the first gallery is about memory, and it begins with a work called The Harvest from 1989, which is a really important work in her career. It's sort of a composite image of the bottom of a slave ship, as Tina would have imagined it. And then she describes seeing a photograph or a lithograph of what the bottom of a slave ship would have looked like. And she came to that only at a point in her life when she was probably in her 30s or early 40s. So this was like a revelation for her. And she was totally seized with the idea that, more people need to see this. So she creates that, and that sort of orients the first gallery, which is about memory, both ancestral and personal. And then the second gallery is more about place, so that you'll see the South Carolina quilts in there. You also see a Pittsburgh quilt in there, which is hanging suspended from the ceiling so that you could see both sides, because the back is a historical map of Pittsburgh. The next gallery is about, Tina has a series that started in 2014 called the Diasporic series. And that was a real breakthrough in her work. And formally, she's using more silk screening at that point, and she's using more transparent fabrics. But it's also really connecting ideas of waterways and diaspora, also in a really broad way to spirituality. And then the final gallery is just kind of the recent works, right? More recent series. One of them is called Or Up or Down, which is about really life's choices. And yeah, so your other question, it was about the installation. The installation appears in the gallery about place, and it's thinking place in a very spiritual sense, because Tina's a Catholic. She converted to Catholicism by her own choice at the age of 12, and she's to this day an extremely observant person, although I would describe her more as spiritual than religious. But it's a site-specific sculptural installation that she made just for the show, and it's basically a side table that has been in her family for probably 100 years. I think it was her great-grandmother's. And it's just a table that sits in her house, and she uses it almost as an altar, as many Catholics do, right? Like when you say the rosary and you light a candle, and you often have prayer cards and Bibles and things like that. She kind of created it with that in mind, and she has all these items that are really of deep personal value to her from throughout her life, and also like things related to quilting and scraps of fabric from her great-great-grandmother's quilt. And it actually a thumb piano that she bought in Beaufort and when we visited down with her. So some more recent additions as well. And I thought it was great, and we went back and forth on the altar. We informally call it the altar. It's really untitled, but we went back and forth on this. At first I really wanted it. I thought it was going to be a brilliant idea for the show, and then sort of going through all of the work with her, I was like, my God, there's this like sensory overload. I'm not sure this is going to work. Should we pare this down? I realized that it was really super important, and it communicated something. It communicated that extra dimension of her work, which is like really, really deeply spiritual. I'm glad that you were drawn to it.
Well, you can't help but notice it, right? It's like, one of these things is not like the others.
Right?
Yeah. So.
Yeah. She's a quilt maker, of course, and that's her bread and butter. But I mean, I tried to include stuff that showed the breadth and variety of that practice itself, and the things that sort of inform it. So, of course, Drew created this amazing short film that tracks our travels with Tina to Beaufort and to St. Helena Island and back into Pittsburgh. And so there's a shortcut of that in the galleries. And across from that is sort of these 3 pieces, unfinished pieces, scraps of silk screened fabric that are just pinned to the wall just because I wanted to show process. I wanted to sort of literalize that process. Give viewers a sense of like what before, after, and during, what that process is like, because I realize that the quilts can be pretty dense.
Yeah, they could take you. I mean, it could take you into levels that may be hard to climb back out of.
Right.
But that's what I love about it, and I think this is where the success of that exhibit really stands out. But most importantly, man, I think you really do a service to Tina Williams' work. I knew nothing about her. I knew nothing about story quilts. I mean, I really only thought of quilts as one thing. And this exhibit really exposes not just her work in such a beautiful way, but really takes that whole entire level of art and amplifies it in a way that I don't think we could have otherwise done. So, Michael, I think it's beautiful. I hope you feel the same way. I hope you're not walking there like, damn, I wish I'd have put that quilt over there.
No.
Sooner or later, you had to let that go, right?
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I mean, that's exactly, any curator wants to hear exactly what you just said. So I appreciate it. And every single show, there's always something that you say, oh man, I wish I could have done this. But you know what? I have to say, in a weird way, I don't think I would do anything differently.
Michael Neumeister is the curator of Tina Williams Brewer Stories of Grace, on view now at the Columbia Museum of Art. You can learn more about the exhibition at our website at www.columbiamuseum.org. After this break, we hear from the artist herself.
People need to understand that, we're living on generations and generations of people that have come and gone physically, but their energy is all still here.
Tina Williams Brewer. But first, this.
Hey y'all, producer Drew here. Wait, before you press that skip button, I promise this will be quick. I've only got one thing to say. CMA members receive free admission to all exhibitions, including the upcoming fashion and photography-focused Lee Alexander McQueen and Anne Ray Rendezvous, opening on October 7th. To learn more about CMA membership, visit our website, www.columbiamuseum.org. And now, back to the show. Hey y'all, welcome back. Producer Drew here. If you've been listening, you might have noticed that I'm not Ray, and that is because I am being selfish today. And what I mean by that is I really wanted to interview Tina. Her and I have been working together for about 6 months now, and we've kind of developed a pretty strong bond. And I wanted to celebrate that today by the best way I knew how, which was to talk to Tina directly. Tina's joining us via Zoom, and I'm so happy to see her face once again. Tina, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Drew. I'm excited to be here. What a pleasure.
This exhibition is a survey of your work over the last 40 years. That's got to be a really strange experience. The first time you walked into that room and kind of saw your legacy and history like on the walls. Can you talk to me about that experience and what that was like?
Well, it was overwhelming. And it was overwhelming every time I went in there, because it's like kind of akin to like a family reunion with generations of voices and people. I think the overlap of the fact that it was in South Carolina, which is kind of my place for ancestral connection, the energy there on that land really resonated with me from the very first time that I went there. So when I saw my work there, it was just amazing for me. And seeing it all together again, because a lot of those pieces are kind of in different museums, and I haven't seen them probably in about 15 years. So it was very moving, and I couldn't take it all in. And even when I came back the second time, it was still not enough for me to focus down on all of the work. So there was just so many stories that were there.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that a few of these works have been in museum collections for a long time, but also a few of these works have been hanging in your home for a long time. Is it weird when you look up at the wall and there's just like this quilt that's always been there that's missing now?
Well, what the other thing about my house is that I have chair rails that go around. So the larger pieces don't fit in my house. So I live with the more intimate pieces, like card tricks, and those are family stories. And it's like having, a photo album open every day for you to be able to kind of like look over, remember, capture all of that. So, but I do miss them, but I think that it's overridden by the fact that the work was always done to be in public form. And so it is a teaching tool.
Yeah. I mean, I know your background was like as a teaching artist. Can you talk to me a little bit about what that was like?
Yeah. I mean, that all came probably out of just the need to get out of the house. I worked first for the Department of Aging. I worked with senior citizens. They boosted my morale by saying they were so honored to have somebody young coming into their places. What it made me understand about purpose in that things that you think that you're not, which I never thought I was a teacher. I never thought I had anything to offer. And the senior citizens were the ones that kind of put me on the map in that reference. And then I had the support of the Contemporary Crafts and the Pittsburgh Center for the Arts, who are teaching institutions through the Pennsylvania Council of the Arts. So I've been with them for probably almost 30 years, and it's gone from early childhood education all the way through to senior citizens. So right now I'm working with a group of church people, and they're finding their voice. And it's like giving opportunity to find your voice. So I love teaching, but I always have to say, I need the support of a team because I'm not an academic. I am horrible with the computer. I do what I do. I do one thing. I inspire people to do their best and to be creative and to take a chance and not to be afraid. So that's my purpose. But all of the other mechanic pieces comes from teamwork. So I am a part of a team. So I never take full responsibility for the success of anything that I'm involved with.
What brought you to quilting as being your medium of choice? Like, I know that you were doing some work in quilting circles and stuff like that and learning from some other folks, but what really made it click for you?
Well, I think the portability of the process is what made it click for me. I had encouragement from my quilt friends that what I was doing was worthy. So it's the support from outside that you're doing good, keep going. And so everything fit in a Ziploc bag and I could continue that process. Unlike with my ceramics where, I'd get so dirty and I'd have to go someplace. My weaving, I'd get tied up in my threads and wouldn't be able to get things completed before the kids were up from nap time. And so I needed something that was like 15 minutes and down and 15 minutes and down. And I am like a visual person. So, where a lot of people will pick up a book and just sit and read for 15 minutes and that satisfies them. I need to listen and work with my hands. It synchronizes, it brings peace. And so that's what quilting did for me. Being able to work with my hands and listen at the same time. So as they say, it brings me joy.
You mentioned the process, and I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about that process. I know you use a sewing machine sometimes too, but you're doing a lot of hand weaving with these. How do you go about planning one of these? Because they're not your traditional grid-based quilt. So is it more of an organic, like I'm feeling it out as I go? Do you come in with some sort of idea of what you want to do beforehand? Just like, what's that process like for you?
Well, the process is really all about engagement with people. It's, your relationship with the outside world, listening to what they say. Even though I talk a lot and I talk over top of people all the time, I'm still actually kind of taking in what they're saying. So I'll hear something, maybe a podcast, maybe an interview, and I, kind of jot that down, put it into my journal, and then I'll come back to it. And then I have a corpus of symbols and patterns that I've developed since the early 80s. And so I'm from West Virginia, but my mom's family is from Kentucky. And so there is a strong base there in terms of quilting. And we had in our family on that side, midwives. So that process was sitting dormant for a very long time because nobody had brought it forward. Also with my grandmother on my dad's side from Ohio, and it was from the Serpentine Mounds. And there was like this whole indigenous component that I never knew about. So I was pulling history that people have not been talking about. They all seem like they're just like little desperate kind of things that are floating out there. But when you start pulling them together, it begins to tell a story of identity.
Do you think it's kind of safe to say that your process would be considered like intuitive then? It seems like you're following a lot of intuition in terms of like the decisions that are made and sort of the symbols that you're using. I don't want to speak for you, but like
I want you to speak for it because I want you to speak for I want you to speak up for the experience that you had when we went to St. Helens Island, and that there was a new layer of information in the place that you grew up in, that you could feel a difference. And that, I think that's, bringing emotion. I mean, in the academic world, they don't bring emotion. I don't understand that. Well, why you want it to be just factual. People need to feel something. They need to know something about time and place. People need to understand that, we're living on generations and generations of people that have come and gone physically, but their energy is all still here. And so when you tap into that, what do you do with it? How does it make you feel? And, does it push you forward to try to discover more? And I think curiosity is probably the thing that maybe is missing a little bit sometimes because of the way that data has to be connected and, scores have to be put in place, and that they forget about the part where you just have like a little discovery, like an aha moment, and it's exciting.
It's your process is super layered, no pun intended, but it is. There's a lot of parts to it, and it's not just the quilt on the wall, like you said before. It's the story gathering, it's the idea gathering, it's gathering of the materials. There's a lot of gathering, but I'm curious, like, what's your favorite part of the process? And it might be hard to answer, right? But like, is there like a specific part that like brings you joy, whether it be like intellectually or just like, because it's fun to do? What's that part that puts a smile on your face?
It goes back to the people. It's always about the people. It's like the gathering for me. And then because as I'm doing the piece, I'm talking to people about the piece, getting their opinions on it, just telling the story. What do you think about this? What do you think that? Because I'm unearthing a lot of history. In the very beginning, when I was first started quilting, I was probably only did maybe 1 or 2 pieces a year because the information wasn't readily available. I had to go to the library. I have to talk to people. And then, of course, then there's the part where, if I'm talking about community lore, it's not written. You have to find the seekers and the sayers. And again, it's like serendipitous. Are you going to run into it? So you just have to keep talking about it, repeating it over and over again. But you know what? Eventually, you're going to come across that person that's going to give you that nugget that you need. And, my parents gave me the sensibility of everyone deserves acknowledgement, so you treat everyone the same. And that if you live in a community, you are part of that community, and you never turn your back on it. It's like do unto others as you have them do unto you. So that was the basis. And then the culture piece came. All of that then fed into being sensitized to what you feel and question, why do you feel that way? And what can you do to get to resolution? So resolution means that you're forever a learner.
So, this exhibition, it's really a survey of the last 40 years, but I want to know about the next 40 years. Tina, what do you have coming down the pipeline? Like, what are your plans for your practice in the future? Are you just gonna keep at this prolific schedule that you're on? I mean, you made a lot of quilts in the last couple of months.
Yeah, well, I did. I know I won't do that. I had a retrospective somewhat 5 years ago in Dallas. And I said, this is it. No more of that, because it takes so much. So now I guess, here we go. Michael came up with this great idea and I said yes. So then we were off and running again. So I don't know that I'm going to try to like produce that kind of work in great numbers going forward. I want to like try to have a little bit more of a slower pace. I just had a birthday there, Drew, Saturday, and then I'm 74 years old. So I'm thinking, how do I want to move forward? And I want to, continue to work. And so I've had a really good opportunity to have one of my pieces blown up and it's public art. And I thought, I've never thought of my work as public art, but wouldn't it be amazing, to have these stories like really exposed to people in a greater way? I mean, museums are wonderful. Classrooms are wonderful. I've touched, like, over the last 30 years, many people. But then I'm always surprised at the people who have never seen any of the work, and so I would really love to be able to see that happen in a greater way, which is to have some of the work to be exposed as public art.
Well, I'm excited to see what's next, whatever that may be. But, I just wanted to say happy belated birthday to you. And for all of our listeners at home, if you want to celebrate Tina's birthday the right way, you can come down here and check out her work, which is still on view. It's a great exhibition, a lot of fun, and just really, really unique and cool work. And I think you'll enjoy it. Thank you so much, Tina, for being on the show again. And just for constantly sharing information with me for the last 6 months. I really appreciate it.
Well, don't be a stranger. I get up early.
I do, but not by choice. I just have to.
Well, get caffeinated and give me a call.
I will. Thank you, Tina.
Divinely blessed. Bye-bye.
Tina Williams Brewer is a quilt maker based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Her work incorporates unique fabrics and inspirations drawn from her travels, including time spent at St. Helena Island in South Carolina. Don't miss your chance to see her exhibition, Stories of Grace, on view through September 3rd here at the Columbia Museum of Art. I think storytelling is absolutely ingrained in the fabric of human experience. What I've always found fascinating is the way in which poetry and fiction and art become different perspectives for telling some of these stories. When you think about the story of the South, for instance, and as a Southerner, storytelling it's ingrained, it's woven into our DNA. There's so many experiences that are involved in that, but you're talking about a traditional oral culture for a very long time. And stories change over time. There's more things added, things taken away, where art is always trying to drive to a truth. It may not be the truth with a capital T, but it's driving toward a truth that may be a part of a story that is troubling. And we have to experience those things all over again, but we bond through those things all over again. As an artist, as a writer, or as a poet, when you are contributing to that storytelling, you are putting in a voice, your voice, into that story, into that longer thread, and you're a part of it. You're a part of telling that story of the place, of the people, to the point where you begin to realize that there is no one story. There is a meta concept of multiple stories, of multiple experiences. Even the story of the South cannot be told as a singular thing. There's the African American experience. There is the Native American experience. There's the Hispanic and Latinx experience. Thinking of gender, thinking of sexuality, all of these different experiences are different stories that are woven into the fabric of this really large quilt of human experience. And I think that's one of the things that I love about what Tina Williams Brewer is doing, literally weaving together quilts that tell stories that on a metaphorical level is contributing to a much wider and deeper sense of story. And that story is the story of us. You've been listening to Binder, a production of the Columbia Museum of Art. Today's episode was hosted by me, Ray McManus, produced and edited by Drew Barron, with special assistance from Joel Ryan Cook. For more information about CMA exhibitions and programs, visit our website at www.columbiamuseum.org.